I'm the CEO and founder of Sook. And what Sook does is rent spaces by the hour to all sorts of different occupiers across 100 plus hours of the week. What I want to do today is challenge some of the norms about how we engage with occupiers, because there isn't an asset manager in the UK at the moment who isn't worried about having excess loss-leading space. And what I believe is that by looking at a slightly different business model, you can actually drive more revenue at the same time as embracing a whole new ecosystem of brands that have never been in your assets before. As a former landlord, I'm not one of those people who bashes landlords and blames them for where we are today, but I do think it's worth us all looking at ourselves and the way we do business, considering whether it's always the most accessible way to bring the people that we want into our assets into a contractual engagement. So what Sook does is it's building a portfolio of assets. We have 11 to date, which rent space by the hour. We drive about 3 times more income than a headline rent and allow you to do all sorts of different things at different hours of the week across approximately 100 hours of that week. It's all based on a reaction to the fact that nobody needs a shop 7 days a week. We're in a world of agility and flexibility. With the economic headwinds that we're facing now, no one wants to make a bet for even 5 years, let alone 10. And therefore that customer base that we've all become accustomed to in terms of long-term leases is being eroded. We as an asset class need to think differently about how we can incorporate all sorts of different occupiers and not just retailers. What traditionally has happened is that we have searched for bankable occupiers across all of our spaces. We're looking for a 10-year lease, a strong covenant strength. We all know the kind of dream deal that an asset manager wants to land, and it's very much supported by our very mature sector that's grown with multiple layers, all supporting this goal of relatively risk-free income. But what that does is it cuts out a whole spectrum of potential occupancy that just can't afford to take that risk, doesn't have the money, doesn't have the know-how, but more than that, has become accustomed to retailing in a totally new environment, which is online. They expect agility, they expect data-led analytics to understand what's working or not. They don't expect to sit in a space for a decade hoping that a bet they made at the beginning of that term is going to still generate the same level of revenue at the end of that term. The days of the upwards-only rent review, as we all, I'm sure, acknowledge, are coming to an end. And by being more flexible, we can embrace a new generation of occupiers and create more revenue in the tens of thousands of empty assets that are lying across our space. We don't need to build new shops. We just need to find a way of making them accessible for all sorts of other people. So by creating an hourly model, even though I'm sure some of you are thinking, how on earth can that work logistically? You can embrace a totally different occupier on a Monday morning to what you would have on a Saturday afternoon. And you can still drive viability by pricing your weekends at the same cost as renting an entire week through a traditional lease. It's worth paying that premium for a brand because it cuts you out of all of the normal fixed costs that you'd have in the other 5 days of the week where your brand isn't selling anything or achieving any of the goals it set out for. A fractional leasing model drives more revenue, but also appeals to customers much more. And by having a series of events or lateral occupancy with different brands at the right times of the week for the right customers, you are driving much more consistent footfall rather than the peaks of troughs that are also the bane of so many assets throughout the nation. And you can serve the communities in which these spaces are set in a much more effective way than just having a fashion retailer that is, to all intents and purposes, an empty shop on a Monday through to a Thursday. And that's what Sook does, working with some of the biggest asset managers already in the UK, but also some of the biggest brands. When I took a punt and set up this business, it was all basically begging landlords to take a chance on us so that we could prove that there was a revenue model that existed. And I'm pleased to say we're doing that. As I say, generating 3 times more revenue than a headline rent in nearly all of our stores. And that's working with some of the biggest brands in the world too. We've unlocked access to an entire spectrum of occupancy that just didn't exist before. And I'll tell you a bit more about some of the most exciting ones in a second. What's awesome about that is that you can de-risk the financial viability of a Sook unit in your portfolio with a big brand, and then you can charge appropriately for all sorts of other community-led occupiers the rest of the week. And all of that adds up to something really interesting. We could probably hang our entire business model on the event-led occupiers after 6 p.m. It's a totally different way of thinking about how to manage your assets in terms of time and not space. So, how does it work? Well, we are essentially a massive device. You can put it into any space, and using Canva, which is a big Australian Photoshop unicorn, you can deploy whatever content you want onto the walls. You can pick your furniture, you can pick your audio, you can even pick your lighting solution, you can book staff, you can send stock for a fulfillment solution that happens out back, and you turn up to take part in your hourly focused Sook to achieve whatever goals you want, and it is ready to go, looking amazing. We provide a full analytics solution that allows you to see exactly how you've performed and decide whether you want to do it again or try somewhere else. And this is a video of our Edinburgh site in St James's Quarter for those of you who have been. It is a huge modular solution that can insert into any space. Rear loading is preferable for the back of house element to roll people's fit out into play when their time comes. You can mock this up in any way you choose, using Canva as I've mentioned. But what's key about this fit out is it can be moved around. It doesn't need to be site specific. If an asset manager does find that dream 10-year lease, the Sook can be moved to one of the other assets, and we all have vacancy right now. And that leads to kind of totally different kind of occupiers. This is a Belgian Depopper, and I'll talk more about Depop in a second, who's a regular customer coming for a matter of hours, making about 3 to 5 times ROI on her hourly cost, and driving her own footfall using social media. But it works for big brands too. I just seem to have jumped a video, but this is Radley in that same space with a bespoke fit out, selling obviously women's accessories over a slightly longer time frame in a completely different way to how they would normally use physical space. Here is that video. It's just in reverse order. And we're opening sites rapidly. Last week we opened Birmingham, Southampton, Leeds. We opened Shoreditch. Next week, there is a huge drive. We can't keep up with customer demand now for these spaces that all sorts of different occupiers can use in a completely different way to what we're all used to. Here's some of the brands that are coming in the next few months. And these are the big brand ones. But I just want to talk about Depop for a second. I didn't know what Depop was when I started Sook. I'm sure there are people in this room that don't know what Depop is. You should find out about Depop. It is a fashion revolution that is driving huge amounts of potential occupiers into physical space. Bought by Etsy for £1.3 billion last year. They are a really interesting case study in how the high street's changing. Now, we are, as a retail sector, got a really unhappy workforce. Only the mining sector is more unhappy than retail workers, which is pretty sad. So why would you become an employee at Next these days if you can set up your own business at Depop? And there's this sort of fallacy that Gen Z are idle. They're not idle. They've just got different choices, and they want to go direct to their own customers rather than working for someone else. If we collectively don't recognise that change, that generational shift that just didn't exist in any of our generations, I'm guessing, looking at the audience, then we will miss a trick for what is going to happen in the future of our high streets. And as you can see from this slide, it's a really interesting blend in those big brands that want different hours, pay different levels, but it's everything from music. So we launched a band that I'd never heard of because I'm not cool or trendy enough at the weekend, called D Group. They was just selling merch, no artists in place at all, and have sold out the O2 for 2 nights just from having a space. Jägermeister, never going to have a shop permanently, but have got customers customers throughout the country that they want to engage with in an agile way. But it's about much more than these big brands. They pay the bills, and it's so important that we embrace them for the financial health and the future of our high streets. But where I get really excited is about all of the other brands. We've talked a lot about the importance of embracing community, but the reality is community doesn't have a covenant strength, and it doesn't have that much money. It can't drive a really sustainable economic solution in a real estate asset, even a provincial one where rents are low. So it needs to be blended with all sorts of other uses, and that's what we're doing, driving high-value retail hours with big brands, and then embracing all sorts of other random uses. And this isn't a great example of that, actually, because this is a Premier League footballer called Alan Saint-Maximin in our Metro Centre site, selling headbands to Geordies. Now, as random as that sounds, Geordies are not the most affluent demographic in our country, but he sold 300 headbands in an hour and a half and made £25,000, which he promptly reinvested into a toy shop next door for some reason to garner popularity with that fan base. The subscription brands online are another rich pool of occupancy for us. So blending online retail with physical retail is really powerful, particularly the subscription model. And these guys have customers everywhere. This particular example, Freddy's Flowers, are, as it would sound, a subscription-based flower provision service. They want to capture a customer through IRL engagement, and then they keep them for a year or so. Driving the halo effect of online is something I think we need to get much better as a sector about doing, because there's no substitute for real-life engagement, but the reality is people still want to make purchases online. We just need to stop fighting the online surge and start embracing it. And events are key. They are really popular wherever you are in the UK. As I say, most shops are closed at 6. Why aren't we using those latent spaces to engage with community and drive really awesome activations? You've got a £100,000 digital tool to make look amazing. And it drives all sorts of random stuff, from reggae aerobics, which is basically twerking, to salsa, to Depop sellers again, Uber activations, makeup, all sorts of completely different elements that are key to the community and drive footfall that spends in other nearby adjacencies at random times of the week, not leaving just a peak and trough model across that week. Launch parties are big for us, and I think that's, again, key for the agility piece. There are customers for online brands everywhere, doing a lot of work with the big social media guys such as TikTok. Their customers are everywhere. It doesn't need to be a prime retail area. At the moment, we've got no idea, really, as a sector, whether the future of physical retail sits in a prime London type scenario or it sits provincially. With the future of work completely up in the air, being able to be agile and drive retail into all sorts of new locations is key. And I dare say we will see particular suburban towns starting to be more desirable for retail than the centre of London is today. And just a few more examples across food and drink, amenity, launch, and even charity. The lady you can see on the left-hand side is a TikToker with 16 million followers. She wanted to raise money because she was upset that Joe Biden had withdrawn from Afghanistan. I mean, this is how kind of random the usage gets. She, with 4 days' notice, launched it. With that much following, we had to be extremely careful because 0.1% of her following turns up, and we've essentially got a protest on the street. She had a huge activation. It drove enormous amounts of footfall, and then she moved on. But you don't have to have millions of followers. The guys on the right did it with a collection of just 20,000 followers, again, bringing our Oxford Street space to a standstill. And then other pieces, just to talk about, that we do a bad job of embracing because they don't pay the bills, is things like art. NFTs are really prevalent now, and doing things like digitally is excellent, but art has really strong community value. There are artists in every community, and people want to see amazing art and potentially buy it. It has a high price point, and drives a strong ROI around physical activations. And we should do a better job of embracing it. Final piece is just around health, wellness, fitness. It really upsets me that most shops are closed until 9, 10 o'clock in the morning. Why can't they be used for yoga, Pilates, something that focuses around giving the community what they need and doing it on a national level? It's something that we're blending with big brands who want to reach the authenticity of local customers and local service providers, local instructors. And we think that's really big for the future, including embracing children. You know, children and old people are in our retail centres at different times and have completely different needs. Let's address that with an hourly rental model. Beauty, huge at the moment. There are more, the only resurgence we're seeing in our high streets at the moment is from hair and beauty brands. We need to embrace that better, and the move towards self-employment in that sector, again, a bit like the Gen Zs, is vast. We need to support these guys, and they bring a large following of locally, which is great for all of our assets. Workshops have been a huge thing for us. TikTok activation was all about just creating content, and there's TikTokers everywhere. You can see them on the streets in all of your local towns, and TikTok want to engage in all sorts of different ways. I've talked about NFTs, so we're just pushed towards community. And one of the things that we're working on with some of the biggest brands is supporting those local brands. They're prepared to pay a premium to reach local customers in provincial locations. They'll pay a London price to be in the metro centre, as you can see there with MasterCard. And that's a great way of driving the business case that is key to supporting everything that we do in all of these shops. I'm sure you've seen enough examples now, so I'll just get through to the end and finish off. Last piece about Depoppers. I mean, I couldn't have imagined setting up a business when I was 20. We're now seeing such a strong surge in activity. It's almost one of our biggest income streams. This is 20-year-old girls, in the most case, driving their own footfall using their social media following. That was unimaginable and is 10 years ago, and is now challenging the dominance of some of the more established brands that we've worked with so far. That combined with things like live streaming in real life, driving a huge uplift in GMV, and the agility that this provides to grow a brand without the headache of physical space. Because remember, really, occupiers don't like landlords, is the sad reality. They don't want to engage with them. They want something that's simple, straightforward, clear, and in their favour. And as a sector, we need to get much better at addressing that. Just to show you how the progression from TikTok has worked, from live streaming to content creation to the next stage of Sook, which is actually anchoring live streaming with large social media brands across the country and beyond. So thanks for listening. I hope that's provoked some thoughts about different ways of engaging with occupiers and doing it in a way that is profitable, purpose-led, and good for communities. Thank you.